back in the water again. Liebling, pass me the oar. Thank you. Now I can really put some distance between us and the coast. Aye, she still floats. I was worried we would be taking on water by now. Now that I think about it, we haven't had the dory in the water since October. I just smell that spring air. Are you okay, Liebling? I'm sorry we got you up so early, but isn't this exciting? This is like one of those adventure books I've read to you. You know, Treasure Island or something of the sort. Though our treasure is going to be of the guild kind. Fine. I'll admit it, your grandfather and I just wanted to get out of the house because of your aunt. We hold no grief, but she's kind of bothersome when she visits. Even worse now, since she insists on feeding us. But I haven't forgotten dinner yesterday. We both caught each other's eye when she tried serving us her boiled steak. And do you want to know what else? I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but your aunt has another surprise for you today. That's right. More of them weird clothes that she stitches together for her cats. Of course, now she's trying to make them for kids like you. Just last night, after you went to bed, I saw her downstairs talking with your mother, and she was making you a hat. She said it was the template for her church friends, but this thing was more frills than hat. So, your grandfather and I thought we could avoid her till she leaves this afternoon. So sounds fair, right? Granddad and I got some fishing in, and you get spared another ordeal at your aunt's personal boutique. Goodness, you are just like your mother, you know that? Oh. Speaking of cats, let me look at your hand. Yeah, your hand is going to be fine. Just remember to be careful around those dock cats. They're, different from the ones we have at the house. Where do I put this? You've been to the market with your mother before, right? Well, you know those old ladies who are always looking for a bargain, even if they have to fight for it? Well, that's what those dock cats are like. They're used to people, but you shouldn't try to get in their way, okay? Dad, are the fish biting hard or hardly biting? Yeah. I think today is a good day to teach you how to fish, Liebling. Hands down the best thing that can be taught to any man or woman, young or old. Should come naturally to you. Your ancestors were very good fishermen. Otherwise we probably wouldn't be here. Now, if you want to catch boatloads of fish, then what you need is a net. This is good for making money at the market. But a more therapeutic way of catching some fish is with a rod and lure, like this one here. It's simple. You got your rod, and this is your reel. The reel helps to bring your line in, and this on the line is called your rigging. This stuff is important since it will help you catch the fish. This cute little thing is your floater. When you got a fish hooked, this thing will move up and down into the water. That's when you know to reel it in. After that, you've got your sinker. This is a little weight that'll get the line under the water. And then the most important thing of all is this right here, the hook. Not too appealing right now is it? That's why, when you were getting dressed this morning, I went to the garden and got us a bucket of some worms. These will be our bait to catch the fish. And you take your rod and you cast away. All we've got to do now is wait for the fish to bite. When the floater goes down, you yank on your rod so the hook goes into the fish's lip. Now there's no harm in it, fish don't feel pain. Then, once you've got them unhooked, you leave them in the basket, after which the fish goes straight to the kitchen. Hopefully tonight we can have ourselves a real dinner. labeling. I'm sure you can see now why fishing takes so long, but no worries. You won't catch scurvy on this voyage. Your grandfather and I packed food and, hold on. Dad, did you pack water? 9. Oh, well, this takes me back to when I first went fishing. I think I was around 10, and we had nothing but beer to drink. But don't worry, I brought my canteen with me. Just let me know when you want some water. Now look here, we got bananas, biscuits, meat, and... oh, I grabbed your aunt's cookies. Ugh, something for the ghouls to eat. I just thought something funny. I imagined your aunt getting ready to leave this afternoon, and there's a knock at the door. So she goes over to answer it, and there's this flock of seagulls, and one of them says, "We wanted to return these to you," and they dump these soggy cookies at her feet. I thought it was funny. What's that at your feet? I thought I lost it. It's my favorite hatchet. I must have left it here when we went camping on one of those islands last summer. Yeah, but it's lost its edge. I think I got my stone with me. Well, this is going to take a while. I wonder why they don't make double-edged heads for hatchets. Well, we got some downtime. Do you want to hear some ghost stories? That's what I used to do for all the other boys when we went fishing. Let me try and think of a good one. Usually your mother wants me to read you your scriptures. I remember one now. There's only one known case of keepers of a lighthouse abandoning their post. The place was a lighthouse somewhere off the west coast of Scotland. This was an exceptionally remote and stormy spot, even for a lighthouse. And for that reason, the lighthouse was an important one. Sometime in December, a ship was sailing near the lighthouse, and sailors saw a lifeboat cut directly across the bow, heading for the lighthouse. But the men in the lifeboat looked pale and ghostly. The sailors first thought that they had come upon a boatload of corpses from some shipwreck, but they could see the arms of the rowers moving. The lifeboat soon disappeared from view. Later that night, a storm broke. It was then that passing ships noticed that the light from the lighthouse was out. Fortunately, there were no wrecks caused by the absence of the light, but there were plenty of worried and angry skippers. At first they thought that something was temporarily wrong with the light, but days passed, and it did not go on again. There were 3 men who tended this light. If one of them had become ill or even died, the others would surely have been able to restart the light, or send some sort of distress signal. There was nothing. It wasn't until the day after Christmas that a supply ship went to the lighthouse to investigate. The lighthouse was empty, and the searchers could find no reason why it would be deserted. The searchers found 2 oddities. The men's foul weather gear, oilskins, and sea boots were gone. They also found shreds of seaweed, a variety unknown in that region. But the strangest revelation was yet to come. In a logbook that was kept by the head lighthouse keeper, there was a description of a terrible storm that lashed the lighthouse for 3 days starting December 12th. Never such a storm, he wrote. The log indicated that the men were badly frightened and spent the time praying and crying. The final entry in the book was December, a few days later, maybe the 15th. One day after the light went out, and it read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." There was no hint as to what actually happened to the three men. What puzzled everyone was that there had been no storm on the days indicated by the logbook. In fact, on the island of Lewis, that were a mere 20 miles away, the weather had been unusually calm. The storm began on the night of the 15th, and official inquiry into what had happened could reach no conclusions, but residents of nearby islands had their own explanation. They had always believed the islands were haunted, and the only fools like those who kept the lighthouse dared to stay on them overnight. The local people believed that the ghosts of shipwrecked sailors sometimes come ashore to claim the living. Let me think of another. The Demon Cat of Washington. Underneath the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is a maze of corridors where it is easy to become lost. These are the haunts of the creature called the Demon Cat. So back in the day, cats were kept at the Capitol to control the population of rats. Eventually other methods of rodent control were used, and the cat population of the Capitol dwindled to nothing, except for the one cat that no one wanted to meet. Supposedly there was this Capitol Guard member who described an encounter with DC, that's what they called it. The guard was walking down a chilly, dark hallway when he saw a shadowy cat walking silently toward him. As it walked toward him, it seemed to grow. The guard felt paralyzed as he stared into the glowing, piercing eyes that came closer and closer and grew larger and larger. The animal grew almost to the size of a tiger. Its purring changed to a ferocious snarl. There was a deafening roar as the monstrous animal leaped with claws extended towards its victim. The guard was too terrified to move. He just covered his eyes and waited, but nothing happened. The demon cat had disappeared. Down through the years there have been varied reactions from those who have encountered the phantom. Some have fainted, some have run screaming from the building. Others, like the guard, became paralyzed with fear. Once, an appearance of DC may have triggered an elderly guard's fatal heart attack. The demon cat is regarded by some as an omen that always appears just before a national tragedy or on the eve of the changing of the administration. But pretty crazy all the same, now isn't it? In about the same place, people have this thing called grief. In Washington, D.C.'s Old Rock Creek Cemetery is a large bronze statue by the celebrated sculptor Augustus something, I think his name was. The statue of a shrouded, lonely-looking figure bears no inscription. It is commonly called grief because it is said to inspire feelings of sadness in those who see it. The monument was commissioned by the historian Henry Adams to mark the grave of his wife. Adams was a member of one of America's most prominent families, the great-grandson of President John Adams, the grandson of President John Quincy Adams. He was a distinguished scholar in his own right. His wife also came from a very prominent family. He was well regarded as a very well-educated woman, fully the intellectual equal of her husband. In late 1870, Adams left his teaching position at Harvard and settled in Washington. His wife's health became poor, and she became a virtual invalid, though no one seemed to know what was wrong with her. Then one cold winter evening, Adams returned home to find his wife unconscious before the fire. She never recovered and died a few days later. Adams said virtually nothing about his wife's death and tried with considerable success to keep all of the circumstances surrounding the death quiet. Inevitably, rumors multiplied. The most persistent was that his wife was deeply depressed and stricken down with great sadness. So when Adams commissioned the monument, he told the sculptor that no attempt is to be made to make it intelligible to the average mind. Rock Creek cemetery officials didn't think the memorial a proper one and resisted having it placed in the cemetery. But the influential Adams prevailed. Later, Henry Adams was to write his autobiography, considered one of the great American autobiographies. But he never once mentioned his wife. Stories about Adams' wife's ghost began to circulate just a few years after her death. People were said to have seen the ghost sitting in a rocking chair in the bedroom of the house in which she died. Then there would be a loud scream and the ghost would vanish. The house is no longer there, but the stories have been transferred to the monument. One groundskeeper recalled how the statue seemed to come to life, and that the eyes appeared to stare out from the shadows of the cowl that nearly covers the forehead and sides of the face. Another story is that people who have visited the monument at dusk are sometimes joined by the form of a woman dressed in old clothing. If it had been Henry Adams' intention to obliterate his wife's memory, he did not succeed. Here's another one. From time to time, people who live along the Mississippi River near Vicksburg have reported hearing the screams of a woman coming from somewhere out in the river. Screams are usually followed by words in French. Translated means something like, "Help me, in the name of God, the men are hurting me." No source for these mysterious screams have ever been found. This particular phenomenon appears to have begun back in 75. Those along the river have linked the screams to something that occurred in 74. The riverboat Iron Mountain set out from Vicksburg for New Orleans, carrying 57 passengers and towing a string of barges. Somewhere on the voyage, the big paddle wheel steamer disappeared. The barges were later found drifting in the river. The tow ropes had been slashed, not broken. Hundreds of miles of river bottom were dragged, but no trace of the Iron Mountain was ever located. One of the most plausible explanations offered for the disappearance was that the ship was attacked by river pirates, who still operated quite freely for years after the Civil War. The Iron Mountain would have offered a tempting target to the pirates. On the passenger list were several Creole women who spoke French. Could the ghastly voice be that of one of the pirates' victims? Maybe. Could very well just be hogwash. And I got another one for you. From the homeland. There's a bit of a folklore wisdom which holds that a person should not mourn too long or too deeply for a loved one who has died. The loud mourning, this legend holds, may attract the attention of an evil spirit, and this spirit may appear in the form of the dead lover, which yields terrible results. This is the legend of the demon lover, and has been retold in many forms. The German version is the most common. There was a young farmer named Bruno, who was rounded up and forced to serve in the army of the King of Prussia. He left behind a young woman named Lenore, whom he had promised to marry, and who loved him very much. Months passed, and word began to spread that the Prussian army had suffered a terrible defeat, and many were killed. Slowly the survivors began to straggle back home, but Bruno was not among them, nor did anyone seem to know what had happened to him. Gradually, Lenore began to realize that her love had died on some distant battlefield. Lenore was overcome with grief. She shut herself up in her room and cried out either for Bruno's return or for her own death so that she could join him. Her family feared for her sanity. Then one winter night she heard a horse gallop up in the front of the house, and a familiar voice called her name. Lenora had the wild hope that Bruno somehow had not been killed, but had merely been taken prisoner and now had returned. She rushed out of the house, and there was Bruno, looking exactly as Lenore had remembered him, yet strangely changed. His movements were stiff and mechanical, and there was no expression on his face. He reached down and lifted the girl up behind him on the large black horse that he was riding. The horse galloped through the village and onto the broad highway, its hooves barely touching the ground. Lenore was freezing. She clung to her lover for warmth, but his body was as cold as the air around him. The ride seemed to last for hours. Finally, the black horse drew up in front of iron gates, which swung open as it approached. Lenore now realized that the horse had carried them to a graveyard. The figure that she had taken to be Bruno dismounted and pulled her roughly to the ground. The figure had changed now. The uniform was rotted and tattered. The face had become a mask of skin tightly stretched over a grinning skull. It pointed a skeletal hand to an open grave and said, "This is our wedding bed." The next morning the caretaker of the cemetery found that an open grave had been filled in. He made no attempt to explore further, for he had long since come to the conclusion that to do so was simply stir up evil spirits. This is a good one. I heard this from Billy Hopkins when I was younger. Old Zeki finally died at the age of 93. Some folks said it was a blessing. Though he had enjoyed good health for most of his long life, in his last few years Zeki was terribly crippled with arthritis. For several years the best he was able to do was hobble about painfully, unable to even straighten his back. He walked, if you can call it walking, completely bent over. That gave the undertaker a lot of problems. Zeki's body was so badly bent and so stiff that he couldn't be properly laid out in his coffin. Finally, the undertaker had to actually have the upper part of the body strapped down in order to get it into the coffin. As was the custom, many of those who had known Zeki gathered at the funeral home and sat in silence in front of the open coffin, as a sign of respect for their old and now departed friend. The scene was a very quiet one for about half an hour. Then there came a squeaking and groaning sound. The coffin began to shudder, and there was a sharp report like a pistol shot. Zeki's body suddenly sprang up into a sitting position. Of course, what had really happened is that the straps holding the bent old man's body broke down. When they snapped, the body appeared to sit bolt upright of its own accord. This alarming sight terrified those who had been sitting quietly in front of the coffin. Some screamed, and all rushed for the door, all except one. Hiram, Zeki's oldest friend, just sat there with his head bowed. Then he looked up, straight at the sitting corpse. "Zeki," he said, "if you're getting up, I'm going home." Pretty good, huh? And now, well, those were the only good ones I remember. What else did we talk about on those fishing trips? Oh yeah, sea monsters. Well, for hundreds of years, or maybe since the invention of sailing, people have been talking about seeing strange creatures out at sea, like sea serpents. I heard a story of people seeing one up at Cape Ann. Supposedly, the first people to see it thought it was a long line of sharks or turtles. But then it moved into a nearby harbor, and that's when people could get a better look at it. It was long, something like 100 feet. It had dark skin with a white underbelly, and it glided on the water by moving a series of humps on its back. It was dancing around for a long time, so long, in fact, that some fishermen took a little boat like this one and rowed right up to the thing. Then he leveled his rifle and shot it in the head. He didn't miss though, because he heard the bullet bounce right off its head. So this serpent, or whatever it was, takes notice of this little person in his boat. So then it starts swimming towards him, and the waves the serpent cast in its wake were immense. As it moved forward, it slowly lowered itself down into the water till its head was a few feet above the water. Now, our fisherman was about to go overboard, fearing that the thing was going to ram into him. Before he did, he took one last look behind him at the monster. And do you want to know what he saw? Nothing. As the thing came closer, its head dove into the water and probably swam under the boat. It resurfaced about 40 yards away before ducking down again. After that, no one saw it again. Probably one of the few recent stories that I know about. Did I ever tell you about the Kraken? Now that one is as old as sailing. It's just like that one story I read to you, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's like a massive octopus, so big in fact that men would confuse its head for an island. And it did what you expect a monster to do. It destroys ships, devours the souls of men. Of course, if a giant octopus were real, it wouldn't live long on account of all the navies of the world who would want to destroy it. But maybe something smaller. I've heard stories about that, like down in Florida. They got all kinds of weird stuff washing up on their coastline all the time. One day, two boys around your age were going for a bike ride together along a popular beach. And then one of them looks over and sees this mass that got washed up on the shore. They walked right up to it, and they can't make heads or tails of it, literally. So they go back to town and tell some fishermen about it. And then these guys, the fishermen, take a look, and it's like nothing they've ever seen before. Thinking that this might be important, they tie the creature down to a tree away from the beach. About a day goes by before some scientist fellow from a local university makes his way over to identify this thing. Unfortunately, the sun and the gulls had eaten away at it. So our scientist man does what he can to make an educated guess at what it is. At first he thought that this thing might have been just part of a dead whale. His visit was short-lived. Soon enough, the mass began to fall apart and go into the ocean. However, the scientist fellow had taken skin samples back to the university. What he did was compare the skin of this thing to that of known sea creatures, and he was absolutely dumbfounded. The thing on the beach was similar to an octopus, but drastically different. Of course, an octopus couldn't grow to be that big thing on the beach. So what do you think? If it was a piece of the Kraken, could be true, or it could be a bunch of rot. Tall stories are nothing new. I've read to you Verne and Wells before. Only difference between them and your grandfather and I is that we aren't published. I've got another way of thinking about it. In Asia and Africa, they have these weird animals called elephants. They've got like tree stumps for feet, bodies like boulders, and have a fifth arm coming out of their heads. I can only imagine what the first people thought seeing these things, and who would believe them when they went back home. Fortunately, elephants aren't ravenous man-eaters, so common folk aren't too interested in them. But apparently they can still kill people. You see, elephants live together in packs or clans, and if one of them gets spooked, then they all get spooked. So they start running together in one direction. It's called a stampede, and that's how they get people killed. by a blind fury, all-consuming. And, I forgot where I was going with this. You get my point, right, Liebling? What is that? We're a good distance out now, and I can see the lighthouse further down the coast. I heard they repainted it, but I thought it wouldn't be the same old paint scheme. Yeah. You know, I used to be an assistant keeper of that lighthouse when I was younger. Actually, that's how I met your mother. It was some time ago. Your grandfather on your mother's side was a senator back then, and he wanted to get a portrait painted of your mother and aunt. So what better place than over yonder lighthouse? Portraits by themselves are pretty. This one was prettier than any other since your mother was in it. Come to think of it, your grandfather probably still has it hanging up. Anyways, just as the portrait was finished and was being packed away, a storm started to blow in. So we were more than generous to house them until it blew over. I remember the other assistant keeper got paired with your aunt. And he had this look of help me in his eyes as I showed your mother around the lighthouse, how it worked, and all the places that could be seen from the top. One thing led to another. And a few months later, a stork brought you along, and that's how I married your mother. Oh, jeez. Oh, hey, look at the line. What is this? We haven't gotten a bite all morning. I don't think this is plain fisherman. Like, something isn't right here. Oh my god, it's an earthquake. Look at the harbor. I can see some buildings falling over. Yeah, come on, both of you. Come on, we gotta get back now. I hope your mother and aunt are okay. What in the hell is that big red thing in the water? Oh, shit, it's got the boat. The hatchet, Liebling, give me the hatchet. It's okay, Dad. God, what is this black stuff? It's like ink. Water. We're taking on water. Liebling, take the bucket and start scooping out the water. We gotta get there now. We've hit something. It's a sandbar. Both of you. Let's bail out and make our way ashore. Come on, Liebling, the dory can't be saved. Liebling, what's wrong? What in God's name is that? Looks like part of a tentacle. Forget about it. We've got to make sure your mom and aunt are safe. Now let's go.